I have now the pleasure of introducing Zoe Addington, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy and Minerals for the Government of Alberta. Zoe Addington is this Energy and Minerals is actually a new division. We'll start again. She's not just the ADM for Energy and Minerals, Government of Alberta. It's actually Energy Transition, Energy and Minerals Alberta, and this new division is working to accelerate the development of technology, such as carbon capture, use and storage, this of course, as well as nuclear, geothermal, and I will say again, not just small modular reactors, but nuclear writ large, for a whole lot of reasons, economic opportunities, but of course to help reduce emissions as well. Zoe joined the Government of Alberta in 2019 and has over 2 decades of diverse experience, including in the energy sector in Calgary, the federal government, post-secondary and industry associations. She served as the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Director of Policy to the Premier of Alberta from 2014 to 2015. Zoe holds a Master of Business Administration and degrees in Political Science and Historical Studies from where else but the University of Calgary. Please welcome Zoe Addington.
All right, so thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I have to say it's a little intimidating to follow that previous presentation and recognizing all the people in the room that have such a breadth of knowledge and experience. When I certainly don't, and not in technology, not in nuclear, but I think what I can speak to is government process. As you heard from my bio, I've got experience working in politics, working in government, working in exec council in Edmonton, as well as working federally, and then provincially here with the Department of Energy in Alberta. And so I think what I was largely looking to cover today, I'll make sure I can do this, is really the role of the government and the role of the provincial government in this. And I think how we approach this at a really high level is to sort of to look at and ask the question, what is the role of the government? And what is the role of the provincial government? And as I'll touch on, Alberta is slightly different than from the other provinces, and so that'll dictate a little bit of our role and how we go about doing this. So firstly, just to start, mandate, the government has provided positive signals publicly and to stakeholders on nuclear energy, but maybe perhaps not articulated really comprehensive policy direction. So in mandate letters, the Premier's mandated both the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, and as you heard from our Parliamentary Secretary, also mandated the Ministries of Affordability and Utilities, as well as Environment and Protected Areas, all with different roles within the development of nuclear energy in Alberta. So at a basic level within the government, we do have a regulatory policy task team established to approach this work. It is being led by Energy and Minerals, but there's a lot of involvement specifically from affordability and utilities, environment and protected areas, municipal affairs, and Indigenous relations. Touching on just a little bit of some of the areas, so we really do see this as a cross-government process. Energy and Minerals, as I mentioned, we are currently taking the lead, but we do have primary responsibility for work as it relates to heat for industrial applications. Affordability and Utilities, obviously, has primary responsibility when it comes to electricity production. EPA has responsibility related to environmental regulatory requirements, tech and innovation, as well as I've got a colleague here from Alberta Innovates that provide technical and research support. Municipal affairs when it comes to safety codes and standards, as well as if we start talking about engagements, working with municipalities, we're talking about site selections, obviously municipal affairs has a has a big role. Indigenous relations, again, when it comes to whether that's public engagement done by the government, whether that's proponents looking at sites, whether it's economic reconciliation in terms of involvement in projects. Indigenous relations has a role to play, public safety, emergency services, and jobs, economy, and trade is our lead department for investment, as well as labor and workforce development, which is plays a big role in this. So again, I think what the way we've kind of started to approach this is to look at, and I should have put in a slide, somebody put together this good slide of if you were going to do a nuclear project, what are the different pieces? And I think looking at all the different aspects of it, what we try to look at is, okay, so where does the government play a role? What are the pieces that we would have a role in, whether that's a supporting role, whether it's a leading role? And so some of the areas we've started looking at is benefits. So if you look at whether it's economic benefits, socioeconomic benefits, nuclear and SMRs, the government would have a role when we're looking at reducing carbon emissions and lowering environmental footprints, as well as consistent and reliable power generation. When it comes to safety and emergency response, province plays a role, as does the federal government, but again, just looking at the province, safety and emergency response is a big consideration. Environmental considerations, and again, I've got a slide later on where we look at the different regulatory roles between the federal government and the province, but provincially environmental considerations, impact assessment, permitting, well, some of that is obviously federal, but provincial government has a role. When you look at workforce development and readiness, again, that's a consideration. So, you know, we hear a lot about, and I know, I think the School of Public Policy is looking at some of these areas when it comes to workforce development. Do we have the educational programs available? We've heard concerns from the federal government that when looking at building nuclear projects, there's only enough expertise to build one or two at a time across the country. So how do we compete for that expertise and workforce? Obviously, you need nuclear experience to operate. So that's a consideration. And obviously, I think, look, when you hear about building any big project in the province, access to trades and workforce is always a consideration. Regulatory and licensing, again, understanding the different roles between the federal and provincial government. And then looking at supply chains, and again, I think that's both access, as well as I think we're always looking for economic opportunities. If we have nuclear in the province, is that an opportunity to have, you know, be a participant in things being built here that get sold elsewhere? So can we be part of a larger supply chain, not just access it to build within the province? So I think another thing that we've sort of done in terms of approaching this, because like I said, I think we want to make sure that when we look at our role as a province, it is making sure that we have an environment that is ready and available. We've got a variety of MOUs that we've entered into, both with the federal government as well as with other provinces, to try to learn from work that's already been done and collaborate. So Affordability and Utilities entered into an MOU with Saskatchewan to advance the development of nuclear generation, industrial decarbonization, and enhancing grid capability. We're working jointly on a work plan. We signed an MOU with Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan. It has expired. We're looking to renew it, but waiting for some elections to finish up in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. But to understand what they have done, how we can build on what they've done, and how we can partner. We're part of a workforce study that's being led by the Canadian Nuclear Association to understand the access to and development of a skilled workforce to meet the needs of Canada's growing nuclear industry. I think, again, you know, I touched on this before, when you look at the accessibility and the number of engineers, and provinces start looking at, again, where those folks are and ready to work. So again, that's a joint study we're working on with, they're looking across Canada. We do have a joint workforce working group with the federal government. So We do meet on a monthly basis with the federal government on other energy and environment topics, minerals, nuclear. So we are trying to understand what the federal government is doing. I think they've been exceptionally helpful in terms of offering experience, knowledge, questions that we might have. I think the next meeting is, they're focused on presentation from the waste management organization to make sure we understand exactly what that entails and that role. We have a bilateral table on small modular reactors specifically. So I think they've been keen. I think they also want to know what we're doing and want to make sure that they know what we're doing and how we fit into a larger national plan. But again, I think that's an opportunity for us to learn from them. And I think, what I didn't have on here is a bunch of we do have some MOUs. Obviously, as has been mentioned, there's 2 MOUs with the Korean Atomic Energy Institute, one that was signed in 2001 with the University of Calgary as well, and then the more recent one in April 2023. So again, we do have those with other governments as well. So I think role of nuclear in Alberta. So I think this is where we've been trying to make sure we understand exactly what our role will be, how we can give our elected officials advice, how to manage projects, how to manage proponents as they start to come forward. So unlike other provinces, I think as everyone knows, we have a deregulated electricity market, so projects are undertaken by commercial proponents and not by the government or Crown Corporation. Obviously, if Saskatchewan is looking to build and has SAS power, that's not something that we're doing. So I think, again, when you look at that map of what is involved with bringing nuclear to Alberta, understanding where we fit into that, how we receive those proponents coming to Alberta, what they need, how we can put together, what is, if there's a regulatory system that they need. But again, I think understanding all those different pieces. As I mentioned, and I think as we've heard, we're also looking at nuclear's role in industrial application. That isn't something that we've seen a lot of in other provinces as well. Obviously, in the US, they're looking at that, so we've been trying to understand and learn from, I think specifically Texas, and how that works and how that fits in as well. And so I think, some of my last words, industry interest has been growing. Stakeholders are seeking clarity about, maybe not aggressive, how the right word is aggressive, but seeking clarity about how aggressively Alberta is willing to support, encourage, and incent. So what is that role we're willing to play? Is there funding? How involved are we going to be? I think, there's been references to that CBC article and talking about large-scale nuclear and CANDU coming to Alberta. So what does that mean? What does that mean for our electricity sector largely? And so again, how do we as a province and how do we as a provincial government manage the different industry interest within our existing systems? So again, I kind of mentioned this slide. I've got 4 minutes, I won't get into it, but again, it's sort of just understanding the different pieces when it comes to, on the provincial side. Obviously understanding the role of the AUC when it comes to electricity, but again, if it's industrial application, what does that mean for the role of the Alberta Energy Regulator? We have our different environmental legislations, municipalities, and then looking at public safety, and then on the federal side, understanding the role of the Impact Assessment Agency. How does that fit within the province? How will we treat impact assessments? As well as, again, there's some very clear areas of federal jurisdiction. But again, I think working through what those mean and where there might be some join and where there might be some overlap. I think other provinces have chosen to either delegate more decision-making to the federal side or more regulatory oversight. Others are seeking to lead it more themselves. So again, those will be decisions for our elected folks to make in terms of how they see some of these regulatory pieces. In terms of kind of next steps, so again, Alberta's provided positive signals publicly into stakeholders, but maybe not necessarily articulated some comprehensive policy direction. And so as we work through that, I think we're really interested to understand from folks like you in the room about what this looks like. And I think as well, we think long-term success hinges on engaging with stakeholders, communicating the benefits and addressing concerns. I think one of the things I know I worry about a little bit is, there's forums like this and public policy officials that talk a lot about the role of nuclear in decarbonization. But I think, we need to make sure that Albertans are also having that conversation, that it's not just a public policy conversation, but that Albertans are brought in on the conversation. I think there's, folks from other jurisdictions that are much more comfortable with nuclear, but if it's new to Alberta, making sure that we really are understanding what do people feel about it? What do people feel about it in their regions, but even just as a province? And so I think, really understanding what that looks like is going to be important to moving forward, and making sure that we're in a position to be able to communicate those benefits and address concerns. And then, like I said, as well as sort of, I was going to use the word, not protecting the electricity sector, but understanding how this all fits into a larger electricity sector, because obviously it's important for the province to make sure that consumers and ratepayers are understand how this fits in. So I think that, with 1 minute left, takes me to the end of my presentation, but again, happy to answer any questions if I can. Okay. Okay.
Any questions for Zoe? Did we not give everybody enough
There's
coffee?
a couple of them. Sorry.
Excellent, okay, great. Mike is coming, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for that presentation. My name is Nathan Green. I'm with the regulatory group at Bennett Jones. I'm just wondering to what extent you are looking to Ontario as a potential template to avoid reinventing the wheel on this stuff?
I think I certainly, just to be clear, I don't want to get ahead of where our elected officials are at. And so I think, part of my comment about that comprehensive policy direction is I think stuff we're working on, looking at those other jurisdictions and understanding. I think, I think Alberta, I think I would be comfortable saying that Alberta is interested in setting their own direction and making sure that they are, I think like all other areas, trying to think of the right wording, in charge of their own system as much as possible. So I think absolutely that's a good point in terms of not reinventing the wheel. And I think certainly when we talk to the federal government, they don't want, every province going out doing their own thing, coming up with their own systems, especially, when you start talking about competing resources, competing expertise, and how that's all managed. At the same time, I think Alberta's electricity system is unique enough that I suspect it would be a made in Alberta type of solution. I don't want to get ahead of where, like I said, our elected folks are, especially we've got one in the room, and but I think I'm comfortable saying that.
Dwayne Bratt, Mount Royal University. This builds a bit on that last question about the co-jurisdiction around regulatory processes, because Ontario, New Brunswick, Quebec have for decades been able to work with federal regulators, CNSC, versus their own provincial bodies. Given the MOUs you've got with those three provinces, are you looking at those templates, seeing what can work, what doesn't work, and how you modify that to Alberta? So it's not just how Alberta regulates, but how it regulates with the CNSC.
Absolutely. I think, and the way you phrase that is, I think, exactly what we are doing. So, and I think it'll still, I would go back to say where it does need to be specific to Alberta will be a little bit of the fact that this will be proponent driven, right? We don't have a SAS Power, we don't have an OPG, that's not how we're approaching it. So given that it will be proponent investor driven, will, I think, dictate some of that in terms of where those roles are. But 100%, that is exactly why we have those MOUs and what we're working through. We do want to learn from what others have done, and make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. But again, yeah, it'll be, depending on the usage of it, the location of it. Like I said, I think that the fact that it's unique, that we do have that industrial application and not just the electricity. But then again, also our unique electricity system, it's going to need to fit into that deregulated model. So,
Since Alberta is a pretty unique jurisdiction, especially within Canada, are you looking to jurisdictions outside of Canada, such as the UK or in the US, where they do have a deregulated market?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, I think for the industrial side, especially where we see that in Texas, but absolutely, I think that was one of the first things we did in terms of sort of putting together a bit of a package to sort of understand, yes, what is our role, was to do that jurisdictional comparison.
All right, join me in thanking Zoe.